Welcome to Diva Wargames. I'm Patrick, and I am sick of seeing Space Marines getting gunned down by lasguns. So I'm leaning into my inner transhuman dread by making an army of Astartes using Custodes datasheets. 24 of the Imperium's greatest heroes, individually kitbashed and painted, drawn from the 24 coolest chapters that the galaxy has to offer. Right then, here's the project so far. We did a Crimson Fist last week, and we'll be ticking off another of the Sons of Dawn this week. It's often said that you either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. When you're in the business of picking fights with the Inquisition over ethics, you end up in the former category very quickly. That's right, today we're building a Celestial Lion. Early on in their history, the Lions were called for aid by the Inquisition. Working alongside Inquisitor Apollyon, the Lions descended upon a rebellion on the planet Qatar, where local ecclesiarchy officials had fallen to chaos. It only took 3 months for military resistance to be crushed completely, with negligible collateral damage to the civilian population. Congratulating themselves on a job well done, the Lions departed and left the world in the hands of the Inquisitor. Rather than purging the priesthood and rooting out secular collaborators, Apollyon decided that the world was just too far gone and ordered an exterminatus, consigning billions to death. It wasn't just because he wanted an early dart, honest. The Lions responded to this by denouncing the Inquisitor to the whole sector and sending a message to Holy Terror itself demanding accountability. The Inquisition, unfortunately, does not take kindly to their authority being challenged. Ever since, the Celestial Lions have found themselves beset by tragedy after tragedy, completely coincidentally, of course. On Armageddon, their Thunderhawks were shot down by Imperial air defences. They were led into a multitude of ambushes and disastrous engagements by poor intelligence. Their apothecaries were even targeted by orc snipers wielding Imperial long-las rifles. Yes, orc snipers, honest. After a particularly devastating battle where 4 entire companies were wiped out, leaving only 96 Lions remaining, they were given a chance to redeem their honour by the Black Templars, a cousin chapter. The surviving Lions and a number of Templars embarked on a near impossible strike against the war boss Thogfang in his base of operations, during which Pride leader Ekini Dubaku was able to execute the war boss. As a reward, High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars elevated him to Chapter Master of the Celestial Lions, and sent the survivors on their way to rebuild their chapter, with a gifted starship and a group of Templars to help them along the way. Surely, nothing else bad is going to happen to the Celestial Lions. If nothing else though, these experiences have made the Celestial Lions and the Black Templars ride-or-die battle buddies. Maybe the real glory was the friends we made along the way. And with that, let's get to the build. I started out by picking out this Blade Guard veteran body, because the Lions are really ornate in most of the art. Grabbing my favourite power pack to start the palette, I added a selection of other options as well. They were all sort of splattered down in one place, so time to spread them out a little bit. Looking at the selection, I found this one with lion head vents. That's something that's also a running theme in the art. The rest of the power pack looks a little bit too industrial though, not quite ornate enough, so I decided to take the best of both worlds, taking the lion's head bits off this part and putting them onto the 2nd edition backpack. The Celestial Lions have a sort of Pan-African theming to them. Their names are usually drawn from various African languages, linguistically, and lions are quite emblematic of the continent inherently. Given that I'll be doing a number of other historically inspired Marines later in the project, Minotaurs being very Hellenistically inspired and the Ultramarines just being space Romans, I decided I'd draw inspiration from the Zulus when making this chap. Finishing up on the backpack vents now with my extremely mediocre sculpting skills, something that will become a theme this video, I moved on to picking out a helmet. I used a beaky last time, so I'm going to use my other favourite helmet variant, the Mark 7, with its iconic Vox grille at the front. Honestly, if your helmet doesn't have Gothic arches on it, are you even trying? Now we embark on the ever finicky work of getting the pose on the head and the backpack slotted into place. After that, we move on to the weapon. Going with the Zulu theming, I decided he had to have a spear and a shield, which would be made from organic materials. Obviously, in the 41st millennium, cowhide's simply not going to cut it, but we'll get to that later. Looking at the spear more specifically, I'm making an Ikla. It's a sort of short stabbing spear, optimized in two ways. Firstly, for being really light so the user can run further without getting tired, and secondly, to still be able to incapacitate the enemy really effectively. The cost of that, of course, as there's always a trade-off with these things, is throwability, as the shaft is really thin on these things. I made it out of a regular spear by extending the blade out and shortening the handle significantly. This is one of those times when doing things digitally is really convenient. It'd be annoying as hell to do this in plastic. Pinning is delicate work at the best of times, never mind on tiny little weapon shafts like this. And imagine extending the blade out, I'm not sure how I'd pin that at all. Okay, now the spear's attached, let's grab a shield. I toyed around with some Tyrannid bits here, but I decided that getting a nice, plain, smooth shield would be the play here, and I'll add the organic textures onto it later with green stuff after it's printed. All that's left is to sort out an arm and a pauldron now. I used the same set of arms as with his left arm from one of the older marine kits, and then picked up a relatively plain pauldron that still has some adornments. I wanted a relatively plain one here so I could really let that bright sky blue sing out over the gold when it comes to painting. Now that's all been put into place and posed, the only task left is scaling. I must admit I did mess up a little bit here. The Crimson Fist that I did last week is slightly but noticeably larger than this guy. It's okay though. Astartes have short kings too, I'm sure. I went and got lunch at this point and remembered that the Custodes Warden datasheet has a ranged attack too, and I hadn't represented that on the mini yet. I had to think about what guns I could do, but I settled on giving him another couple of Ikla for him to throw. I guess they're gyro stabilized now, so they could be thrown effectively. I guess that technically means it's not an Ikla anymore, but who's counting? The spears needed a little bit of resizing, just to make sure that they didn't look out of proportion with the remains of his scabbard that I've left on there. The final part of the build is grabbing a jousting shield, in case his silver Deathwatch pauldron doesn't leave him with enough blue on him to read as a celestial lion. If that's the case, I can add the jousting shield on later and paint it blue. And with that, the digital part of the build is done. There's a long way to go before we hit the paint though. I've got some real life mediocre sculpting to get to yet. Okay, let's jump into real space. A 50-50 mix of milliput and green stuff is a really good combo, with the sculptability of green stuff and the post-curing hardness of milliput. Once that's all thoroughly mixed, I'll lay down a thin layer on the front of the shield. The first step for scales is laying down the outlines, starting with parallel lines in one direction and crossing them in the other. Then I'll just push the tops down and raise the bottoms up with my sculpting tool. The other bit of sculpting is laying down the base for a lion pelt around his shoulders. High-ranking Zulu soldiers would sometimes do this with leopard pelt rather than lion pelt, but this boy is a celestial lion, so I'm going to use my artistic license here to give him a mane. Once a really thin sheet is rolled out, I'll cut it into the rough shape it needs to be and coax it into place. I'll be adding the fur later, but that's the final result. And the shield as well. Right, finally time to lay down paint. I'll start by base coating all of the metallic parts of the Mini in my favourite paint, Death Metal. After that, we'll move on to painting all of the blue parts in Regal Blue. It's a good solid base for bright and saturated blues, which is exactly what we want with the Celestial Lions. I'll also hit the joints of his armour with this colour as well, but it won't get any highlights, just a wash later to darken it down. I'll also do the back panels of his power pack in this colour as well, just to add a little bit of interest to the back of the model. Next, the shield. It gets a white base coat and then a black speed paint to add the shadows between the scales in quickly. I figured that dragon scales would be a bit more suited to the 41st millennium than cowhide, and black does go so well with gold. Back to the armour. I'll do the first highlight layer on the gold by adding just a little bit of bright gold into my Death Metal. I'm going over most of the armour here, except where the shadows are really deep. I'll just make sure I'm getting the rim of the protruding part of his breastplate around the Aquila, and then we'll move on to the leather. It's mostly just the belt that goes leather really, but I'll also paint his fur mantle in this colour as well. It won't really be seen on the final product after I've added the fur, but it'll make it less obvious if it's a little bit thin in places. Second armour highlight now. I've added in a little bit more bright gold to my existing Death Metal / bright gold mix, and I'm painting it on a slightly smaller area than last time. The gold's really starting to pop quite nicely now, and I'm starting to be able to see what he might look like when he's done. His chest Aquila and helmet ornamentation get a quick coat of grey as a base coat, followed by a splash of Nuln Oil. Then I'll move on to painting the silver parts of the Mini with their chainmail highlight, gently overbrushing the letters on the Deathwatch pauldron with the side of the brush. I'll take the time here as well to pick out the various ornaments on his armour, including his reliquaries and his belt buckle. The blade of his Iqua gets a coat of chainmail too, as do the mechanical gubbins on his power pack. Now we're on to the fourth and final armour highlight, this time with pure bright gold, and just painting the raised areas and edges where the armour should be really catching the light. I'm really happy with how the gold turned out actually. It's got nice depth and the brights are really bright. Now we'll go through a similar process with the blues. My mid-tone is a mix of royal blue and arctic gem. I'll be going through several layers of highlights here, adding in slightly more arctic gem each time. When I'm doing the cloth, I'll be working with short, sharp brushstrokes, running perpendicularly to the folds of the cloth to give it a little bit of texture. I'm making sure to bear in mind where I need to improve my technique here as well. Last week I painted a cape onto my Crimson Fist and it ended up looking a little bit flat. With that in mind, I've made sure to really push the highlights and make sure I get texture down to the lower folds of the cloth as well, not just on the tops. This project is a really good medium for me to be able to push my painting and sculpting skills. It's going to be really rewarding seeing myself improve over the next few months, I think. While I add in a bit more Arctic gem to the mix, I want to call out my inspiration for the idea of putting real synthetic fur on the Mini. My mate Siggy, who goes to my local club, has this really beautiful Goliath gang in our Necromunda campaign, and he's used scraggly bits of cotton swab dipped in oil paint to give his trophies this horrible nasty hair. My style's obviously not quite as grimdark, but I wanted to try a similar technique out regardless. Here's Siggy's gang in all its grimy glory as a point of reference. Now that Korg's chemhounds are haunting all our nightmares, it's time to add the final layer of blue highlights to the armour and the tabard. I must admit, there was a point during this paint where I was quite nervous that the result wouldn't be any good. It's at times like that you've kind of just got to trust the process, and once I saw the depth coming into that tabard, my mind was put very much at ease. There we are. The blues are all done and dusted. Almost there with the painting now. Onwards to a really fiddly bit though, putting a highlight on each feather of the Aquila, as well as his helmet ornamentation. I'm very impressed with myself, honestly, for keeping this in frame, even if my hand is obscuring half the shot. I think I'll put the camera a bit higher up next time. You live and learn. Anyway, time to finish the shield. I've painted the trim gold to go with the armour, and now it's time to add highlights to the scales, as well as a suggestion of texture with short downward strokes on each one. The sculpting was honestly pretty decent for my first time ever doing anything like that involved green stuff, but the paint makes it look somewhat passable. Right, now for the big experiment, adding real fake fur to his mantle. This was done by adding a layer of PVA glue onto the prepared flat surface, and then pushing small tufts of hair down into it. I then slowly worked my way around the hide, building up layers of fur as I went. You know, when I walked into my local games workshop 2 years ago and picked up an Imperial Guard combat patrol, I didn't envision that I'd end up on the internet shaving a space marine with my beard trimmer. It's a crazy old world. Anyway, I slowly but surely cut the fur back until I could see his face and chest Aquila again, being very careful not to leave any bald spots. After a few minutes trim, the pelt ended up with short enough hair that we could call the mini done. Then I just attached the shield, and that's a wrap. Imperial Fist Successor number 2 done. That puts us a third of the way to having the first squad plus leader built. I'm not going to keep you waiting any longer though, let's have those beauty shots. Honestly, I'm really happy with the result here. The lion pelt makes the mini look really unique, and the armour has tons of depth. I've only ever really done large scale metallics as a base coat plus wash before, so this was a really good step forwards for me. The dragon scale shield also came out really cool despite my hack job of a sculpt. Still, it's useful to document one's first unsteady steps. It'll give me something to look back on in a year or two when I'm churning out perfect scales by the bucketful. If you've stayed around this long, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, do all the YouTubery things, leave a comment, and I'll see you next week for the next one. But now, on to Live Me for some closing thoughts. Okay, that's week 2 wrapped. I still feel motivated after 2 weeks. I'm probably still going to feel motivated after 20. That's just the way I work. So this project's going to stick, I think. The end result was pretty good. I'm happy with that. I think the shield I would probably want to do 2 or 3 times next time and then use the best one. But I was a bit short on time. I was originally going to do some like tassels for his arms and legs as well, like some Zulus had. But I just didn't have the time to get it done. There was a lot of weird and wacky stuff on this miniature that I'd never done before. But I'm happy with the result regardless. You love to see some weird and wonderful materials used in miniature making, or at least I do anyway. Right, well, I'll see you all next week for the next one, whichever Astartes I decide to kitbash then. I'm thinking it's Scoriators. Let's see. Oh, and one more thing. Keep an eye out for a community post this week. I'm gonna put it down to a little vote as to which guy I do next. See ya.